Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. Today we're going to look at John Lennon and his decision to create a new band called John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band. John Lennon quit the Beatles in September of 1969. The Beatles were over with, and the four members of the Beatles were able to go their own way and create their own music. And John and Yoko create a band. According to the Wikipedia, John and Yoko created the Plastic Ono Band in 1969 to work together, as well as to do solo projects. They first got together in 1968 for something called the Fluxus Conceptual Art Project. Fluxus was an international, interdisciplinary community of artists, composers, designers, and poets. And this was during the 1960s and the 1970s. And they engaged in experimental art performances, which emphasized the artistic process over the finished product. And once John and Yoko married, they came up with the John Lennon and Plastic Ono Band. The band was a changing one, including Eric Clapton, Klaus Fruman, Alan White, Billy Preston, Jim Keltner, Keith Moon, Delaney and Bonnie and Friends, and Lennon's former Beatles bandmates George Harrison and Ringo Starr. So it looks like John was able to gather a great group of musicians together. Yoko Ono had her Yoko Ono Plastic Band from the years of 2009 to 2015. Yoko and John Lennon were the primary members of the band. So how did they name the band? According to Ono, the name was coined by Lennon as a result of Ono's use of plastic stands for recording. Press material outlined the band as a conceptual movement, not limited to a strict membership like a normal group. Lennon and Ono also stated that the audience were members with the accompanying slogan, "You are the Plastic Ono Band." So the Plastic Ono Band evolves. At first it laid low while John was with the Beatles making the album Abbey Road. In September, John was invited by John Brower, organizer of the Toronto Rock and Roll Festival, offered Lennon free attendance to the festival in order to boost his profile, and John Lennon offered to perform instead. So then he got a band together pretty quickly. He asked George Harrison to perform with him, and he said no. And someone asked Quora.com why George turned John down, and the answer was the band was put together so quickly they wouldn't have time to rehearse, and George was a perfectionist and hated performing live. I could see why he didn't want to do it, because getting the band together in one day sounds kind of stressful. So then George told John to ask Eric Clapton, and Eric agreed to do it. John then got bassist Klaus Fruman, and he was a longtime friend of John's, and then he got the drummer Alan White. Alan was a session drummer and had never met John. He thought it was a prank call until John called him back a second time. And they filled out the first performing lineup at the Plastic Ono Band. And I'm surprised he was able to get anyone to agree to do it at that short amount of time. According to Wikipedia, the group was scheduled to fly to Toronto on September the 12th, the day before the concert. But Lennon, Ono, and Clapton were late to arrive at the airport. Lennon had talked to Clapton's management, but Clapton himself did not know that Lennon had invited him to perform and was not even aware of the concert. So the organizer of the festival managed to reach Clapton personally and told him to contact Lennon and Ono, who were still in bed. Clapton said he got a phone call on the day we were to leave, and he said that someone asked him to do that concert, and it was that night, so I had to make the airport in an hour. And the group had 2 quick rehearsals before appearing on stage. One was during the transatlantic flight from London to Toronto, though they could not hear the music very well since they were playing unplugged electric instruments. And they had another at the concert venue shortly before appearing on stage. Lennon later said that the group didn't know what to play since they had not previously performed together. And they eventually settled on a set list consisting of older rock and roll standards, 3 Lennon pen Beatle and solo songs, and 2 longer experimental songs featuring Ono. It was at this time that John decided he was going to leave the Beatles because of all the tensions in the band. And John told Eric Clapton his plan, and he also mentioned it to Alan Klein, the Beatles manager. So what songs were played that day? Well, the band played for 20,000 people, and they decided to play only songs they knew. They performed the Beatles' Your Blues because Clapton had performed it with Lennon on the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, and his 2 solo songs, Give Peace a Chance and Cold Turkey, the latter of which had its premiere at the festival. And so that was his newest song that John had written. And then Ono was holding the lyrics on a clipboard so he could see it. And then Ono selected a song that was to be the B-side of Cold Turkey, Don't Worry, Kyoto, Mummy's Only Looking for Her Hand in the Snow, which also had its premiere at the festival. and they also performed Money, That's What I Want, and Dizzy Miss Lizzie. The band closed with an electric version of the wedding album track, John, Let's Hope for Peace, and extend an experimental consisting of her screaming the title repeatedly to the feedback of electric guitars. Toward the end of Ono's performance, the audience began to boo and whistle, and the band departed the stage, leaving their guitars and bass to resonate until Mal Evans turned off the amplifiers. So I'm sure the audience enjoyed all that feedback noise. I think they should have ended it with an upbeat tune, and I guess they wanted to be remembered in that performance. Another version of what happened appeared in the Albert Goldman book, The Lives of John Lennon. Goldman said he kicked off the blue suede shoes, following it with his old Mackie Messer number, Money. In this piece, in Dizzy Miss Lizzie, John showed that he still knew how to phrase those golden oldies, but he simply hadn't the vocal power to put them across. He wanted to end the set with Give Peace a Chance. But Yoko decided it was her turn. Her face glowing with joy, she proceeded to take over. She began a wordless rave on the song, Don't Worry, Kyoto, Mummy's Only Looking for a Hand in the Snow. She yodeled for 20 minutes straight against a rigorous riff and then a drone of feedback produced by the band laying their guitars against the amps. Of course, this didn't sit well with the audience, and soon the hardcore fans in the front rows were shouting obscene insults off the stage and walking out in protest. Yoko was very upset. As he led her off the stage, John said he would make it up to her. So then they began to release singles. At the Toronto show, John and Yoko began to record singles in their band. The first single they came up with was Cold Turkey, and John had shown the song to the Beatles, and Paul didn't like it, so he rejected the song. And the B-side was Don't Worry, Kyoto, Mummy's Only Looking for Her Hand in the Snow. And the lineup for the band was almost the same for this recording, except that session Alan White was replaced by Ringo Starr. In November, they decided to do another single, and John decided on You Know My Name, Look Up My Number, and the B-side was What's the New, Mary Jane. The single was put on hold by EMI and never released, probably due to the objections by the Beatles. December 15th, there was another whirlwind concert performance by John Lennon and Yoko Ono Band, and they performed for a benefit concert for UNICEF in London. In 2 days, John and Yoko had gotten Eric Clapton, Klaus Fruman, and Alan White. Clapton brought along Harrison, Billy Preston, and the Delaney and Bonnie and Friends touring group, with whom they were touring at the time. In addition to Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett, the group included saxophonist Bobby Keys, drummer Jim Gordon, and trumpet player Jim Price. Keith Moon of The Who also joined the performance. Lennon later referred to this lineup as the Plastic Ono supergroup. So that surely was a supergroup, a great many people that were well-known and popular. January 27th, 1970, another single was created. The lineup was Lennon, Ono, George Harrison, Klaus Fruman, Alan White, and Billy Preston, along with backing vocalists recruited from a nearby pub, composed the Plastic Ono Band for this session. The song was Instant Karma, and the B-side was Yoko Ono's Who Has Seen the Wind. According to Wikipedia, the next use of the Plastic Ono Band name was the 1971 Christmas single, Happy Christmas, War is Over, credited to John and Yoko / the Plastic Ono Band. The recording featured drummer Jim Keltner, pianist Nicky Hopkins, and guitarist Hugh McCracken, Chris Osborne, who had played on Fly, Teddy Irwin, and Stuart Scharf. The B-side, Listen, the Snow is Falling, featured the same musicians as Happy Christmas, with the addition of Klaus Fruman on bass. Co-produced by Phil Spector, the single was released on December the 1st. So it's neat to see who performed on this song. Having heard it so many times, I only knew that John and Yoko performed on it, as well as some kids. Now we get the albums. And mentioning the albums, I'm just including the ones with John Lennon in them. After doing Primal Therapy, John started writing songs, and it led him to recording the album John Lennon / Plastic Ono Band. The core of the band was Klaus Fruman and Ringo Starr. Billy Preston played keyboards, and Phil Spector also played some keyboards. And this album was the debut album by John after his departure from the Beatles. And when the album was released, it had mixed reviews, but now many feel it's his best solo album. So I guess the Primal Therapy John had in California had his emotions in the forefront. Ringo Starr and Klaus Fruman didn't know what to think about John and his emotions during some of the recordings. Ringo Starr said the old John was gone, and it was a different John, and it wasn't one he was used to. But there were some happy moments when George Harrison came to the studio to help John celebrate his 30th birthday. Harrison presented John a copy of the song "It's Johnny's Birthday" after Ono had asked Lennon's friends for musical greetings to mark the occasion. I bet it was a great reunion of three of the Beatles, and I'd like to have heard that soundtrack that he got. 2 albums were released by John, and while it had some members of the Plastic Ono Band, they weren't the official Plastic Ono Band albums. These 2 were Mind Games. Lennon recorded Mind Games using the same players as the Feeling the Space album, and that was an album Yoko had done, and he dubbed the band the Plastic Ono Band. And Rock and Roll was an album made to settle contract obligations because of a lawsuit. And the sessions feature many Plastic Ono member band regulars, like the Ono Band, Klaus Fruman, and Phil Spector as producer. But when released in 1975 as Rock and Roll, this album was credited to Lennon alone. And the last John Lennon-Yoko Ono Plastic Band album was Walls and Bridges. Lennon began rehearsing his new material with studio musicians at Record Plant East in New York City in July 1974. And this included Jim Keltner on drums, Klaus Fruman on bass guitar, Jesse Ed Davis on guitar, and Arthur Jenkins on percussion. The core players were billed on the album as the Plastic Ono Nuclear Band, a variation on the Plastic Ono Band, the conceptual group to which many of Lennon's solo efforts were credited. The songs on this album were written during the Lost Weekend phase of John Lennon's life when he was separated from Yoko. And this album is a bit like his first album because he bears his soul with songs like Old Dirt Road, Scared, and Going Down on Love. There is, however, some upbeat tunes that are surprising, so this is when he was at his lowest emotionally. He brought in horns to this album. He had Elton John performing the song with him, a fast-paced song entitled Whatever Gets You Through the Night, and that was John's only #1 song. And he even did an instrumental song, Beef Jerky, which I love. So the John Lennon/Plastic Ono Band got its start, according to JohnLennon.com. Yoko had said, in 1967, before John and I got together, I was invited to do a show in Berlin. I thought it'd be great to do a show where on a stage there would be a band, but instead of each member of the band being a human being, there'd be plastic boxes with a mechanism or robot inside that would perform or play an instrument or a tape recording. A year later, when I explained this to John, he immediately got a piece of wood to use as a base and pasted it up a band on the stage. He even got a few plastic objects together, a cassette box, a paperweight, a tube from a record cleaning cylinder brush, and created a little plastic model and said, well, we should call our band Plastic Ono Band. And that was the beginning of the Plastic Ono Band. The concept of Plastic Ono Band, the message is the music. So everyone on the recording is in it. Everyone listening to the recording is in it. Everyone who sings the song is in it. You're in it, and everyone in the world is in it, making Plastic Ono Band the most musical and imaginative group in the world. So that's a great way to look at how a band should be, and coming up with that concept showed the world a new side to John Lennon, away from his former band, the Beatles. I will always love the Beatles and all their songs, but in the case of John Lennon Plastic Ono Band, the listener got to hear a stripped-down version of John, the artist, where we saw into his soul more than we got to see how he was when he was a Beatle. So I can't say all his songs as solo artists are my favorites, but we do see John and his music the way he wanted to be seen. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, that would be great. Also, if you could click on the notification bell if you haven't already, you'll be notified whenever a new video is released. So I wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of the Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.